Now that we have almost completed our major and foundational topics of microservices, and the previous topic that we have spoken was on log tracing with Sleuth and Zipkin. The next module to look at or the next discussion to have is on another Spring Cloud product that you could use and is quite handy in production environments, is a Spring Cloud config server. Now, I'm sure many of you would have used a config server kind of setup at your projects, right? So, for example, if I have to just quote an example, it's like having a centralized repository to store all your configurational properties so that the properties can be shared among multiple microservices. At present, what is happening in our current setup of our Cafe Info and Cafe Review? I'm going back to that Cafe Info and Cafe Review discussion, guys. Yeah. So if you look at our current Cafe Info microservice and Cafe Review microservice, and if there are certain properties that I want to store and use throughout my entire app, you remember where I'm storing those properties? Yes, in the YAML file, right? If you remember, in the YAML file of Cafe Info and even Cafe Review also, in the YAML file, if you remember, we are storing certain properties, right? Pivotal.cafereview.name, we are storing the name of that other microservice, right? Similarly, pivotal.cafeinfo.name, and then I'm storing the name, right? Similarly here. Now, in my example, a YAML file was an easier place to store all my configuration data. And within my program, whatever properties I'm storing in my YAML file, if I want to probably pick those values and I want to inject them into my source code somewhere, you remember which annotation I used to use? Correct, @value. And using @value, we used to inject those properties into our code, and finally all the things were working fine. You remember this? Yes, right? But here in our current setup, every microservice is maintaining its own properties, isn't it? Its own YAML file and the properties are there. So even in Cafe Review also, it has its own YAML file. Here is where it is maintaining. Yeah. But many a times in production environments, what happens is, this is still okay. But in production environments, there might be a requirement where for easy management and a kind of centralized place to store all your configuration, we can have one single place where the configurational properties are maintained. Of course, you can maintain properties separately for every microservice, but instead of maintaining that within the microservice, we can push these properties to a centralized location. So the centralized location will maintain these properties for me. And whenever I want to pick it up, I will, instead of picking it up from here, I will just connect to this and I will pick up my configurational properties. Using @value, I will use it, all that I can do. Yeah. So this is what we can apply. Yeah. So what do you feel, guys? Do you think such kind of setup might come handy in huge production environments? Yes, right? So how do you set this up? Yeah, how do you set this up? For setting this up, we will be using a product called Spring Cloud Config Server. So you can make out that this centralized place or centralized component which maintains these properties in one centralized place. This is called as the Spring Cloud Config Server. And each of our microservices which are planning to use the properties that are maintained by the server, these in my terminologies will be called as configurational client. Yeah, config client. Guys, are you all with me? Yeah. So in this, I don't have any slide per se. I have not created any slides for this. but I have the corresponding demo programs. So in our demo program, the first thing that you will do is we will set up a config server. Okay. So, sorry, not this. So step number one, we will set up our config server. And again, see, when you're setting up your config server, you can decide this config server, where will it maintain those property files? There are various options available. Locally, it can maintain. It can maintain in a remote GitHub or a GitLab or a repository like that. Or it can even maintain data in a local repository. All that is possible. So what we will do is we'll configure a config server. Config server will maintain its properties in a centralized repository. And this centralized repository depends. Usually in production environments, it will be using a repository like GitHub, GitLab and stuff like that. But in our training, we will have to use an alternative to it. Because I'm sure like all of you are aware that as per Wipro policies, using a public GitHub or GitLab for any of our activities at Wipro is not allowed. Yeah, hopefully all of you are aware. Yeah, even by mistake, please be a little careful. Please do not check in and upload and commit anything into any public GitHub or GitLab repositories. That is highly prohibited at Wipro. Yeah. Now, so in my case, if I'm setting up a config server, which is supposed to maintain its properties in a centralized repository, and at Wipro, GitHub and GitLab and all is kind of prohibited, as an alternative to it, what I'm going to do is I'm going to create a local Git repository, on my local machine. But in production environments, of course, this will be done. But for my training, I will be setting up a local Git repo. And in this local Git repo, we will be maintaining the configurational files. So here is where I will maintain the config file. And in this config file, we will maintain all the properties. Yeah. Here we will maintain all the properties. Guys, are you all with me? Yeah. So, and I will, of course, when I say config server, don't think of it like one huge big hardware and all. Config server also is nothing but a Spring Boot app, which is designed to behave like a config server. Yeah. Now, once config server is up and running, we will create our cafe, or we will configure our cafe info and cafe review to behave as a config client. Okay. So this will work as a config client, and it will pull the properties from the config server. Okay. Here also, cafe review also, this will also act as a, in my case, it's not required because cafe review is not talking to cafe info, but same funda we will use. This will also act as a config client, and it can pull the properties from the config server. Does it make sense, guys? Yeah. And of course, there will be Eureka server. Okay, of course, there will be Eureka server because these guys have to discover each other and work, right? So the Eureka server will be still there for your registry and discovery purpose. So this is the setup that we'll have to have for our next discussion, which will be on config server or Spring Cloud config server. Is that okay, guys? Yeah. And you remember in my case also, I'm giving you incremental programs, right? So in my case, this will be Cafe Info 1.1. This will be Cafe Info, Cafe Review 1.1. So these projects will act as the config client. So today I plan to at least cover the config server, and then we will look at how things work. Okay. Abhishek, please hold your questions. Let me complete all the discussions on config server and client. You will get a fair idea, and after that we can address your questions. So this is what we will try to do, guys. Yeah. So what we'll do is, if I start, I will have to do this, at least that config server setup, we have to complete it today. Yeah. So this is the logical time to take a break. We will take a break now and come back. And when we come back, we'll continue with the first part where we will set up the config server. Is that okay, guys? Yeah. Okay. So we'll take a break now and we can come back and we'll resume. So before the break, we had just started our discussions on setting up the centralized config server and also reconfiguring our microservices to behave as config clients so that they can pull the properties, right? And of course, the entire communication will be managed by the Eureka server. So Eureka server is still going to be used as my service registry and discovery. So what we will do today is at least we will set up the config server, and we will look at the steps that are involved in setting up the config server. Yep. Please note, as I told you earlier, I have not prepared any slide deck for it. So we will straight away start discussing about the implementation of the config server in terms of a program. Yeah. So let me go back to my IDE. And these were the projects of my previous discussion, right? Let me terminate all of them and then close. Okay, all of them are terminated. Let me delete these. So I've already created my config server. Let me pull that config server program now. So this is my Spring config server demo. Can you see this, all of you? This is the project that I've created, Spring config server demo. And let me pull this and then we will look at the code. I'm importing it into my IDE. So once this is there, let us analyze the pom.xml file first, just to understand what are some of the dependencies that are required. And we will also look at if we want this program to behave as a config server, what are some of the configurations or annotations that might be needed, all that we will discuss. But first, step number one is to start with the pom.xml. Yeah. So let's analyze the pom.xml first. First and foremost, are you all comfortable from line number 5 to line number 20, please? Yeah, or 19, please. Line number 5 to line number 19. Regular Spring Boot app, right? So this is my Spring Boot, which is acting as my parent. Regular configuration. I'm using Java version 1.8 in my machine. Yeah. Let me scroll just to show you some dependencies. Yeah. Now, are you all comfortable with the dependency from 21 to 24? Yeah. So I have added the dependency for actuator. I'll tell you why and what might be the use of it. So I've added the dependency for actuator. Then, are you all comfortable with the dependencies that you see from line number 30 to line number 41, please? Yes. And of course, our dependency management for Spring Cloud. And last but not the least, my Spring Boot Maven plugin. Are you all comfortable with this? Yes, right? But apart from all these, if you remember, the purpose of this project is to, or this project is to act as my config server, right? So can you all see the dependency from line number 25 to 28, please? Yeah. Group ID is org spring framework.cloud and artifact ID is Spring Cloud config server. So this is the artifact ID of this dependency. So this will ensure that all the dependencies that might be required for this project to act as a config server is made available. Yeah. Of course, if you were creating the app from scratch, can just give me a minute. Stop all these because it's start.spring.io. I'll just choose config server. So if you guys are creating this from the beginning, you can see this is what you need to choose. Yeah, config server. You can see this is from Spring Cloud Config, which will allow me central management for configuration. And as I told you, you can, as a repository, you can store your centralized configurational data in Git or SVN or HashiCorp Vault and all that you can do. So this is the dependency that you should add, config server. So when you add this config server dependency, if you look at your pom.xml, this is the dependency, Spring Cloud Config Server, right? So that is what we have added here, isn't it? Yeah. Are you all comfortable? Yes, right. Now, once this is ready, we will look at some configuration or some properties. But before I show you the properties, step number 2 is, let me show you the main application, runnable application class. Please note, the config server is going to only act as a centralized repository for you, helping you as a middleman to retrieve your values from your repositories, etc., and provide it to you whenever you ask. So this is not a typical REST controller program. Okay, so it will have only a runnable class. So let's look at my runnable class. Look at the runnable class, all of you. Are you all able to see any extra annotation that you have used here? Yes, right. So apart from a regular Spring Boot app, you can see here, I have used one annotation called @enable config server. Yeah. So this is the important annotation. This annotation will ensure that when this app runs, it runs as a config server. Yeah. And you can see that this config server is available from org Spring Framework.cloud config server. And that is where I have imported. Yeah. So this is step number 2. So step number 1, add the dependency for Spring Cloud config server. Step number 2, on your main runnable class, annotate it with @enable config server annotation. Yeah. Once this is ready, we will have to configure our config server to pull the details from a repository, right? So you have to provide the repository path where all your configurational properties, etc., will be stored. So that is what we are planning to do in your application.yml file. But before I show you the application.yml file, as I told you, for our training demo, of course, in production environments, your config server can maintain the configurational properties in a centralized repository, either GitHub, GitLab, okay, or SVN or HashiCorp Vault, okay. In my case, I will be setting up a local Git repo. Because as I told you earlier, if you are using a Wipro asset like Wipro laptop or PC, we are not allowed to work with public GitHub and GitLabs. So I will not be able to show you the demo. So for that, I have set up a local Git repo. So let us look at what are some of the steps that I have followed. So in my case, what I've done is in my microservices folder, I've created one folder called Spring Config Git Repo. Are you all with me? Yeah, Spring Config Git Repo. And can you all see one hidden file called as .git? Yeah. So I'm sure like you guys are aware. Just give. Hopefully all of you are aware of Git, right, guys? I know sometimes I might be asking a very stupid question, but still, yeah. All of you are aware of the basic Git, right? Yes. So for example, in my case, assume this is my folder, okay? Spring config git repo. So first I created this folder. And if I want this folder to behave as a Git repository, a local Git repository, you remember we run one command like this, git init. Yeah, git init will initialize this current repo to behave as a Git repository. Isn't it, guys? Yeah. So I will just say git git init. Now once I say git init, inside this file, okay, or inside this folder, I am creating a file. Yeah. Now I want you to carefully look at this file. Can you see this file name? Yeah. We will anyway understand it better later. I want you to carefully look at this properties file. Of course, it can even be a YAML file, but just to keep it simple, I've created a properties file. Yeah. Cafe info hyphen service hyphen development dot properties. It's a properties file. But look at the naming convention that I have used. The naming convention that I've used is cafe info hyphen service hyphen development. So what is this naming convention that I have used? As I told you, config server will act as a centralized repository from where all the other microservice can pull their configuration data, right? So it is not that you will have only one file where all of them will read. For every microservice, I will have a separate configurational file from where it can pull. Yeah. Now, just to give an example, in my case, I am planning to use Cafe Info to act as one of the clients, right? So if you remember, in Cafe Info, inside the Cafe Info Spring application name, what have I given? Cafe Info hyphen service. That is the name, okay? Spring application name. Plus, here I have used something called development. Development is nothing but the active profile name. Are you all with me? Yeah. If you don't want to use any active profile name, you can also use, if you don't use any active profile name, what will be the default profile name, guys? Answer is there in the question itself. Okay. If you don't set the active profile name, what is the default profile? Correct. Default. Profile name is default, right? So now in my example, this will be the name of my app, Cafe Info hyphen service. And I have set the active profile name as development. Now, are you able to see the naming convention? In your config server, okay, whichever repository it's pointing to, in that repository, you will have a file. What should be the file naming convention? Yeah, microservice application name. Okay, application name, whatever is the microservice application name, hyphen the active profile name. Yeah, dot properties. Are you all with me? Yeah. So if you want Cafe Info to pull its configuration data, what should be the file name? Yeah. In my case, Cafe Info service name is Spring application name is what? Cafe Info hyphen service. Please be careful with uppercase and lowercase. So this will be the first part. Then there will be a hyphen. Now in my case, what is the active profile name? What is the active profile name that I'm planning to use? Development, right? So it will be development and then properties. Yeah, this is how it will look. Guys, are you all with me? Yeah, exactly the same thing for the second microservice also. If second microservice also wants to pull the data from the server, again, whatever is the service name and whatever is the default, active profile name, using that, the name of the file should be there. Yeah. So in my case, I have created one file like this, which can be pulled and used by the Cafe Info service. Does it make sense, all of you? Yeah. So just create this file because this is a repository. Create this file, and inside this file, let me show you the content. Yeah. Look at the content of this file. Does this look familiar? Yes. Where did I have these properties earlier? In a non-config server kind of example, where did I have these properties stored? Correct, in the YAML file. Now onwards, these properties will not be available in the YAML file. Yeah, it will not be available in the YAML file. So I am storing it here. Is that okay, guys, all of you? Yes. So once this is stored, okay, once this is stored in, so once you create this file, but this is a Git repository, right? Local Git repository. So as soon as you create that file, And if you just come and here, if you just say dir, just to do a directory listing, it will show you this file. Yeah, it will show you this file. Now, once it shows you this file is still not added to your Git repository. It's a local file that you have just created in this folder, right? But this has to be added to the local Git repository. So can you help me with the command to add to the local Git repository? Of course, at this juncture, you can check the Git status. When you check the Git status, it will show you that this is a new file. Yeah. Now, how do you add this file to the Git repo, local Git repo? Yeah. You all remember this command? Git add hyphen all, and this gets added, right? Yeah. Yes, -a. And once that is done, once you have done that, okay, you have just added, but it is still not committed, right? So finally, you will say git commit, and maybe you say added, you give a comment, added a new file, whatever, meaningful message, and this you will do. Are you all with me, guys? Yeah. So these are the steps that I have followed to locally set up a repository, create a file as per the naming convention and put the content there. Then check the status. Obviously, when you check the status, it will show you that there is a file which is still not part of the repository. Add that file. But when you add a file, it is only added locally, but you have to sync it with your local repo, the repo, right? Finally, you can commit it. Yeah. So these are the steps that I have done. And finally, this is how it looks. So if I just go into this folder also, just to recheck entire thing. If I just say git status after all these things, it should just say, yeah, I am on, in my case, you can see I am on branch master. Okay. And nothing to commit. All the working tree is clean. So all the steps I have completed. Team, are you all with me? Yes. And of course, whenever you know the basic steps, right? Whenever you make changes to the files, again, you can just add, commit, all that you can do. Yeah. So once this is ready, so this is my path, guys. See, on my local machine, in this folder structure, Savita, microservices, Spring config git repo, this is my local git repo, isn't it? Yeah. Just remember this. Now coming back. Yeah. Coming back, we have already finished step 1 and 2. Step 1 was add the dependency for Spring Cloud config server. Step number 2, in your main runnable class, you have to add this annotation called @enable config server. And once that is done, we will look at the application.yml file. Yeah. I want you to carefully look at the application.yml file. I'm sure you'll be able to understand. But anyway, just go through it. What is the name of this application? This is after all a Spring application, right? Spring Boot application, sorry. What is the name of my Spring Boot application? Correct. Spring config server. It can be anything. On which port is it running? 8989. Yeah. And have I set some active profile name for this entire configuration? Yes. Okay. So if this is the only profile, it will run accordingly. Yeah. So this is the active profile. And according to the properties that you see on line number 1 to line number 7, are you able to make out what am I trying to do on line number 1 to line number 7, please? Every config server should point to its repository, right? Where it is storing all its files. So how do I do that? By using this property called Spring Cloud Config Server Get URI, I have specified this Get URI. Please note, in my case, because I am using a local Git repository, I'm using the schema called file, and I'm linking or I'm pointing to the path of my local Git repository. But in your case, how will your public Git repository look? HTTPS, blah, 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 whatever, right? GitLab, blah, blah, blah. All that entire path you can give exactly like that. Yeah. In my case, I'm just giving, it's a local repo. So I'm just giving this local repo. Yeah. And any guesses what is this default label? If you see this, maybe you will understand here. What do you think is this default label that I've given here? Correct, the branch, right? So in my local, the branch name will be master, right? In your case, depending on what branching strategies you guys have, you can give the default branch label. In some cases, it will be main, right? And in some cases, it will be master. So accordingly, you can give. In my case, it is master branch. Yep. And so that's it. Team, are you all with me? Yes. Now, once you give all this data, okay, once you give all this data, you're almost there. With this data, you should be able to run your this Spring Boot app. And what is this Spring Boot app going to behave as? This Spring Boot app is going to behave as a config server. Yeah, it is going to behave as a config server. Yeah. So let us do that. Let me run this. So let us watch. You can see that it has started, and because I have provided, there was only one set of properties and the active profile name was selected, was mentioned as development. It's following that, and accordingly it is running. So can you see it is running on port 8989, all of you? Yes, right. And I had also added actuator, and according to the actuator, at least one default endpoint will be enabled, which is health, isn't it? Yeah. Now that it is running, how can you check whether your config server is working fine as expected? Yeah. What we'll do is we'll just go to localhost 8989, right? Because that is where it is running, right? So first, let me just run this. Obviously, there is no endpoint here. Okay. So what first I will do is I can run actuator/health. Yeah. When I run actuator/health, you should be able to see the status as up. Now, you might also see status as down. For example, there's nothing wrong in the app, but you have given the URL here, right? So for example, you have given the, sorry, not here. You have given the Git URI here, and maybe by mistake, you have given some wrong URI here. It's not able to pick up any properties or anything from here. You should be able to see the status here as down. So that's an indication that your server is up, but maybe the property files are not proper. It's not able to get those. It's not able to connect to the repo. At present, because everything is fine, you can see the status as up. Yeah, I'll do one thing. Let me purposely, okay, let me do one thing. Let me stop this, terminate this for now. Let me give just to test it, let me give a wrong repo. Okay. So repo YYY I give. Yeah. This is wrong. There's no repo at all like this, right? Let us see. Let us run it. You can see just because you have given a wrong path, nothing wrong in the app. The app is still a valid Spring Boot app. So nothing wrong. It started with 8989. Yeah. But in 8989, now if you check the status or the health of it, can you see it is showing the health as down? Yeah, this is one indication that yes, though your config server is up, yeah, it's not able to connect to the appropriate repo URI that you have mentioned. That is why the status is down. See, you might really not see the status directly. As soon as you look at the console, you might not see. But the moment you try to hit help, you can see here. See, cannot load environment. Yeah. So you can see, you will get one message like this, cannot store load environment. Yeah. And this might be an indication that there's something wrong. Yeah. So what I'll do now is, see, clearly saying what has caused this. No directory or file at this particular place, because it's a wrong thing, right? So this is an indication. Before you throw it open to the clients, please recheck all these things, whether your URI is correct, whether your config server is able to point to it or not, all that you can check. Yeah. So let me just stop it. And then I need not stop, right? Because I'm using DevTools anyway. Okay. Okay. Not a problem. I'll just come back here and make my changes. Okay, this is my correct repo. And now let me run this. So you can see it's up and running. Now let me go back and check the status. Is it up, guys? This is up, right? Now, one more test that you can do is, okay, one more test that you can do is, yes, it is able to connect to the repo. So even in your console, you should not be able to see any such problems as such. So no problems. It's working fine. Now, if you really want to check whether it is able to enable access to that file, from that file, is it able to show all the properties or read all the properties? That also you can check. How? Very simple. I'll just type in something. I'm sure you'll be able to understand. Okay. Just look at this URL and tell me. Okay. First look at the URL. What have I typed in the URL? Guys, this is my server, right? Config server. Right after that, what have I typed? Correct. The app name and the profile name combi. Right? See, cafe info hyphen service, which is this file. Cafe info hyphen service. This is the first part, which is the app name. Hyphen the profile, right? The development is the profile. That I will pass as the second argument. So when I run this, look at the output, all of you. Yeah, look at the output, all of you. Are you able to make out that certain details about this is provided? Okay, what is the name? What is the profiles? Yeah, and which name, which exact file it is linked to. And from that file, whether it is able to get the values. Can you see within that it is showing you the source? What are the two properties that are there? Pivotal.cafeinfo.name, and this is the value inside that. Similarly, pivotal.cafe-review-service.name, this is the value inside this. Team, are you all with me? Yes. So this is how you can set up your config server. Team, are you all with me? Now, once you have set up your config server, yeah, you will now have to set up your config clients. Which will act as your config clients, guys? Once you have set up this and you have also rechecked whether everything is working fine, which will act as my config clients? Correct, my microservices, right? My cafe info and my cafe review microservice. So we will have to now reconfigure our microservice to behave as a config client, and it should be able to pull the values, config values from the config server instead of the YAML, and your code where you are using @value to inject, etc., etc., all that should work absolutely fine. That should be our next demo that we will look at. Team, are you all with me? Yes. So that might take a little while to explain how the entire stuff works and how it works. So this is the logical time where we can take a break for today. Team, are you all with me? Yes. Please note we have completed only the config server setup, and we have also tested whether the config server is working fine. We have tested whether the config server is able to access its repo. We have also tested that within the repo, a particular file, is it able to read that file and is it able to understand or pull those properties that are there? That also we have rechecked. Yeah. So the next discussion will be to set up our microservices to behave as your clients. Yeah. Config clients, config server clients. Yeah. That is what we will do next. Yeah. So we will do that in my next session, that is tomorrow, and we can continue.